Hello, my name is Beth Dixon, and I am the Math Lab Coordinator, and I work in MBSS 222, and it is my job to help you through your math courses. And this is a part of a series of lessons on factoring, and is actually factoring trinomials, factoring part 3B. So you really should listen to factoring trinomials, factoring part 3A before listening to this, because we're starting with example 6. And if you've not listened to examples 1 through 5, this might be a little confusing. It's the best I could do to divide it up so that the time was right. Apparently, I just like to talk. And if you've ever met me in person, you'll know that that's very true. And so we're just going to pick up right where we left off, which we were talking about how to deal with signs, how to make sure we're on the right track with our signs, and how to keep things straight in that area. And we're going to get some rules for our signs to kind of help us keep straight. But let's work one more example to kind of get back into the swing of things if it's been a while since you've watched the lesson. Okay, remember that our first step is always to multiply the first and last numbers, and we want to keep our sign with that as well, and that's going to be negative 45. Now, in some of the other ones, I also kept the variable there. Keeping the variable is not really necessary. I do want to go back over on how to use the calculator to help us. And as we do that, you want to go to your y equals. You want to type in whatever you've got, which including the sign, which is a negative 45, then the divide key, and then your x, so that you have negative 45 divided by x. Then you're going to go to second table. And in this case, I'm going to have to scroll back up from where I was further down from a previous problem. But that's okay. And start back at 1. And I'm going to go through this list until I find a pair that when I combine the 1 and the negative 45, I get negative 44. Well, that doesn't match up to my negative 12 that I'm looking for. Well, anything with a decimal in it causes fractions. We only want to deal with integers, so we skip it. Well, right there, right off the bat, we find it. A 3 and a negative 15. We're subtracting the numbers because the signs are different. 3 from 15 gives us 12. We keep the sign of the larger number, which would be 15, and so that gives us the pair. So 45 could be thought of as 3 times 15, and the 15 needs to keep the negative sign. Okay, now let's talk about how that rule of sign will help us. And I've got the rules of sign printed here, and if you want to set, I'm hoping that to get these out where they're available on the internet or other places, but they're also just available if you want to come by and get it. But if that last term is negative, and for now we want to skip down here to where it says factoring by grouping. When using factoring by grouping, the replacement terms will be a positive and a negative, with the stronger or larger number, which in our case was the 15 that we'll get back to in just a second, matching the sign of the middle term. Okay? So, when that last term is negative, we're going to subtract our values, and we'll have one sign of each, with the stronger one matching the middle term. If you can pause, and you might want to pause and write that down. Rewind and listen to it again. But basically, if this term's negative, these replacement terms are going to have a positive and a negative, and the larger of these will match the middle term. And if you remember from part A, I said to remember to put the negative first because it just makes your factoring easy. Then we're going to look to see what's the common factor between these two. And common between 5x squared and minus 15x would be the 5x. And we're left with x minus 3. Common to the last two terms would be plus 3, and we'd be left with x minus 3. I'm playing with the exposure here, excuse me. And then x minus 3 is your common factor, and you're left with the 5x plus 3. Okay, let's look at the next one. And notice in all of these, we've not had a common factor, but you should be checking everything you do for a greatest common factor before you do anything. And again, no greatest common factor. So the first step is to multiply your 4 and your 4. Get 16. Now with 16, it's pretty easy to go on and write down the factors of 16. And of those factors, which one of these, and again, this one's positive. So remembering our rules for our positive, if that last term is positive, when using factoring by grouping, the replacement terms will both have the same sign as the original middle term. So we're going to look for both of these to be the same as the middle. So both of these will be positive, and they'll add to be 17. Well, that's going to be 1 and 16. So we're going to get 4x squared minus 1x minus 16x plus 4. And because they're both negative, I can't put a positive in that spot right here that I like to put a positive in if at all possible. Since I can't do that, we'll just proceed with the negative. What's common to the first two terms is an x, and we're left with 4x minus 1. What's common to the last two is a minus 4. Remembering you always bring down that minus. Negative into a negative leaves me a positive 4x. A negative into a negative leaves me a minus 1. Now my terms here and here match up. And I'm left with 4x minus 1, and left in front, x minus 4. Okay, let's look at the next one. And you notice on this one looks a little strange. We've been factoring trinomials. Wait a minute, this is not a trinomial. It only has two terms. But it's in the form of a trinomial in that it's an x squared and it has a number at the end without any x's. Oh, that must mean in the center we have 0x. Okay, there are no x's in the center. So if we multiply that first and last term, we get negative 25. Things that multiply 25 are 1 and 25 and 5 and 5. Again, a short enough list that I'll skip getting the calculator out and just write those two down. Now, as we look at that, which of those, in this case, because it's a subtract, we're going to subtract to get that middle term. It's real simple. If it's a negative, we subtract. If it's a positive, we add to get those middle terms. So if we're going to subtract to get the middle terms, we need to subtract to get 0. Well, it'd be 5 and 5. Notice what we're going to do. We're going to get x squared minus 5x plus 5x minus 25. See how those would cancel each other and give us 0x. They'd cancel and disappear. So yes, we could put two terms in there that cancel, and it would still be equivalent. Now, when we factor that out, notice that gives me x times x minus 5 plus 5 times x minus 5 when I factor out my common factors. And please remember that if I'm going too fast on these, that you can pause and rewind and listen to this again. And you can also come in, and I'll be glad to go over these same examples with you at a much slower pace. but I'm assuming that you can do the factoring by grouping, and that's not where the issue is. So I'm spending more time talking about the beginning of it and not a lot of time on the factoring by grouping. So as we look at this, that gives me the answer of x minus 5 times x plus 5. And I want to take time to check this one because I want you to see what happens to those middle terms. And as we do check this one, and again, I'm not spending a lot of time checking and showing you how I check this one because I'm assuming that you've covered that. Those middle terms go away and we get x squared minus 25. Now, we're not going to do this type of factoring, x squared minus 25, using this technique. We're going to learn a shortcut on this technique. But it's this process that we'll see on how to get the shortcut as we look at some of the later ones, because it would be kind of time consuming to have to do all of these problems this way. But the nice thing is, if we don't learn or if we have trouble with one, we can always go back to this technique to get the answer. So that's why we start with this technique, because this is the techniques that's the basis for the other techniques of factoring. And the same thing with the last two problems. If we look at this one right here, notice there's a 1 in front of the x squared. And that will make it, in the long run, much easier to factor. But we'll start out with using this factoring by grouping to show you how it works, and then we're going to learn some shortcut techniques in some of the other lessons. But in this case, that multiplies then just to give me a negative 1 times negative 12 gives me a negative 12x squared. We'll just write down the negative 12. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. Which of those pair of numbers subtract to give me negative 4 would be the 2 and the 6. And I need to make sure that the sign of the larger goes with the stronger, or the sign of the middle goes with the stronger number. I'll get it said right. So x squared plus 2x minus 6x minus 12. And I didn't follow my rule this time. I put the minus in the wrong place, but that's okay. We're not going to erase it or change it. We'll just deal with the signs as they fall. Notice when we divide a negative into a negative, it makes it a positive 2. And we end up with x plus 2, x minus 6. And some of you may have already caught the pattern on how to do this, and that's good if you have, and you can go on and just go straight to the answer. We'll show you some more on this, but notice how that same technique of factoring by grouping works for these problems as well. And then lastly, notice on this problem, we do need to get rid of that greatest common factor first. We can't forget to always look for it. So the common factor is a 6. Then the factors of 2. And the factors of 2, negative 2, that will, because 1 times negative 2 is negative 2, so I would need a negative 1x plus 2x, and I put the plus 2x and then the minus 1x. Again, I got the order wrong. If I'd wrote my steps out, I'd remember to get my signs in the right place, but I'm jumping ahead of myself here as I'm finishing up the lesson. That 6 needs to come down, so I'm going to draw me a squiggly arrow there. X times x plus 2. Nothing common to these last two terms, but I'm going to factor out that negative 1, which will flip both of those signs. And then I'm left with x plus 2, x minus 1, and then bring down that 6. Ooh, you didn't see any of that. Bring that there where you'll see that. Write that x plus 2, that x minus 1, bring down the 6 from where I had factored it out as the common factor. And again, we're going to talk about these last three in the next lesson on how to factor the trinomials with some trial and error, as opposed to using this factoring by grouping. Once you've seen both, then you can choose which one you feel more comfortable with, and which method that you wish to use, whichever one is the fastest and most comfortable for you to use. This was a very quick, very hurried lesson. I realize that, but what I really wanted to do is just kind of give a quick overview on factoring. If you need more detailed help, remember that the Math Lab is open for that anytime, so please come by and see us, and we'll be glad to give you some more detailed help on some specific examples that you would like to see, and we're open anytime that you'd like to come by. Thank you.